But anyway, so those are the cows. We also on the dairy have 3 pigs. 3 what were little pigs, now they're getting to be big pigs, who live right next to the dairy barn, and a flock of about 120 laying hens. And I know sometimes our eggs have also come to Shantiyoga. So that's the dairy part of the operation in terms of the animal life that's there. But that's not all, because we do look at our farm as an organism that includes all the wild life on the farm. It's also important to mention that we have a lot of foxes around and woodchucks. A lot of bird life is there because we have a huge area of woodlands that surrounds the farm. The farm is bordered on 3 sides by a pristine waterway called French Creek, which is a lovely resource that flows through or around our property. We have obviously dogs and cats and rodents, and so I also just want to recognize that all the different forces that those other animals bring in. And again, when I talk about biodynamics, I might mention more about why those are important. Also deer, we have a lot of deer that graze in our pastures with the cows at times, but mostly in the evening when in pastures where the cows aren't. So you have a picture of the people a little bit, the animal life, and as far as the plant life goes, we as the dairy manage about 210 acres of land out of the 430 some that is comprised in the whole property. And roughly a third of that are permanent pastures that are on fairly steep hillsides, rolling hillsides. And for that reason, our part of the farm, which was once part of a big biodynamic training farm that was set up by a fellow named Mr. Marin, was called the Conservation Farm, or the West Farm, because a lot of the good soil had eroded off those hillsides when it had been farmed more conventionally. And one of the impulses of this person who started this biodynamic training farm there in the 40s, Mr. Marin, was to try to find ways to reinvigorate that land through conservation efforts. So those hillsides now are permanently in pasture, and that's a good way to conserve the soil. There's another third of that acreage, roughly, that is sometimes pasture and sometimes hayland, because of course the basis of our feeding system for the cows is to have them out on pasture whenever the grass is growing. Okay, so then they go out, and well, we have 2 milkings, so they come in for milking in the morning, they go out during the day until about 2:30, then they come back in for milking, and they're out at night, and so there's that rhythm of going out and in the barns to pasture. But in the wintertime, of course, they also have to be fed, and there's not grass growing, and then we have to be able to harvest hay for that purpose, or haylage. And so about a third of the 210 acres that we manage are also sometimes pastured, sometimes hay, and then another third, which is way on the other side of the property from the dairy barn, is just hayland, and we have to manage that differently. So all those, I divide that into 3 parts because each of those parts is really managed in a different way. So the type of pasture that we have is a very diverse plant life in terms of obviously there are the sort of basics of most dairy operations, which include clovers and alfalfas, the leguminous plants, but then there are a lot of different grasses. We like to see certain types of weeds in our pastures because it adds to the vitality of the animals and the vitality of the soil as well. So we have, if you were to take a pasture walk with someone who's knowledgeable about the plant life, we have over 30 different species of plants in our pastures, most of our pastures. Some of our hay crop land are more recently planted, and so they don't have those weeds growing to the same degree, but most of the mixes that we use for planting freshly planted hayland also include at least 12 different species of plants. The only monocrop that you'll ever see on our property is when we first open up the soil, and again it will vary depending on the field. Sometimes it'll be every 7 years, sometimes it'll be more like 12 years. Sometimes, as I said, with the permanent pastures, they're never open. But when we do first open them up and plant a new crop into them, we will sometimes plant a crop of what's called sorghum Sudan, which is an African-based crop that's been fairly recently introduced to this country. And the reason for that is, for one thing, it has a root structure that really helps to break up soil and bring a different kind of aeration and life to it. But secondly, it's a plant that is very drought tolerant. And I don't know how it is in Washington, D.C., being closer to the coast, perhaps you don't have the same kind of weather pattern, but we often have a stretch of weather in July and August where we have virtually no rain. And obviously with our operation being based on grazing and forages, eventually, as you know, with lawns, the lawn will dry up and everything will die, and there'd be nothing for the cows to eat. Well, with the sorghum Sudan, it's an insurance that if we really have that kind of a dry spell, the cows will still have something there to eat. So we do use that as a crop. Every year we have usually about 5 to 7 acres planted in that crop. That's kind of the basic plant life, but also important to that are that in a lot of the hedgerows and a lot of the borders, we have a lot of woodland and hedges. You'll see some of which we would not have wanted to have planted in the way that were in this conservation phase. They brought in a plant called Oriental Rose, which at that time was considered a wonderful plant for drawing in bird life because they like to nest in it, and it grows very quickly, but it's also extremely prolific and didn't have any natural enemies, and so now it wants to grow everywhere. And it's like most roses, it has thorns, and so we have a hard time keeping it out of places where we don't want it to be now. So that you'll find that plant in many places. You'll find wild raspberries. So there's this wider realm of woodland and meadow that's also a very important part of the farm organism.
Could we take a quick break and serve seconds?
Sure, absolutely.
We're going to serve seconds now. If anybody would like, just stay where you are and they'll come around. Could we do question and answer up to this point while we're doing that? Maybe we could just ask a couple questions if anyone has up to what he's talked about so far. Is that okay?
What happened to those crazy turkeys? Mention that.
Yeah, we don't want to have crazy turkeys.
Really?
No, the chickens are the only fowl that we have. Yeah, for a while there were some turkeys that were being raised there, and one was called Big Daddy. He lived a lot longer than they thought he would, and sometimes terrorized visitors.
Yeah, you loved him. Good guy.
Could you explain maybe what is the financial system of the community? I mean, are people pay the salary, or how does it work?
Right. So, Victor asked if I would explain a little bit about financial workings of the community. One of the impulses of the community is to be a picture of a way to renew society, the way we work, and in a very small way, obviously. And we don't work for salaries. The idea is that as part of this impulse for social renewal, that people have the right and the possibility of providing work for other people, and if you are able to give of that freely, your work has a different quality potentially than if you're working for money. I think a lot of people who get salaries or get compensation in that way for their work also work for the work and then feel that they're being supported through that. But we make it so that you can't, in that sense, work for money.